Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in enthusiastic support for this legislation. One of the reasons that this legislation is so critical is because the IRS is going through a storm right now. There was a Washington Post article 3 days ago reporting that Treasury and IRS officials expect a 10% decline in collected revenues this year. I'll say that again, a 10% decline or $500 billion. And the reason is because IRS officials have noticed an uptick in online chatter that people are planning to refuse to pay their taxes or to claim deductions or credits for which they are ineligible because they are wagering that the IRS will be understaffed and gutted enough that nobody will notice. The IRS has planned to eliminate 20,000 jobs, 11,000 of which have already happened but are pending court cases. So it may not be unreasonable for taxpayers to assume that the IRS may not be capable of enforcing the law if they choose to willfully buck their obligation to pay. 10%, $500 billion, that's why this legislation is so needed. I'll yield for a question if
you do have one question. Senator from the 56th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
I yield to my friend from the 56th.
I appreciate your enthusiasm for this bill. You cited a report, which I believe was actually just a news article from the Washington Post. Is that not true?
Correct. It was a Washington Post reporting, which I will give it to you. The Treasury officials who were asked about it called it sensational and baseless. So I suppose there's a dispute of fact.
Isn't it true that the prior administration sought to hire 80,000 new IRS agents, some to fill up a huge football stadium worth of new IRS agents?
I'm glad you asked about that. It is true that the previous administration wanted to staff up the IRS. This was mostly to staff investigations of high net worth or corporate taxes. Those investigations, it goes without saying, have all but been abandoned under the current administration. And of course, that is some of the most efficient investigations the IRS is capable of doing, because if you investigate a single taxpayer who's bucking a several $million-dollar obligation, obviously that saves a lot of time instead of chasing after middle-class families for the same amount. So most of those employees were meant to go after the big fish, but those investigations are no longer possible.
Will you further yield, Senator?
I will further yield.
Senator, if the prior administration hired 80,000 new people, and the current one is being efficient by only eliminating a quarter of those, which means almost 60,000 people are still there, wouldn't you just call that good, efficient government?
Well, part of the problem is the uptick in the online chatter, as I cited, about people who are planning not to honor their obligations. So much of this is not just about actual staffing levels, it's also about the haphazard way in which people are being departed from the IRS without sort of a reasonable connection to their job duties. And on top of that, the culture that is created in the American public when people believe that they will not have to pay their taxes. So you've got kind of a double-edged problem here where there's a culture of noncompliance that's being created by the gutting of the IRS and the haphazard way in which people are fired irrespective of the actual staffing numbers.
Final question, Senator.
Sure.
Isn't it true, though, we're citing a news article from a biased publication, and based on all of this, we're basing it on online social media chatter? Isn't that true?
Senator, this is the IRS and Treasury's estimations as per the paper. Now, as to the paper's credibility, the only comment I'll make on that is that Jeff Bezos has seemed pretty friendly to the Trump administration in recent months. If there are no other questions, Mr. President, I will yield the well.
You have no further questions, Senator.